the Caitlin Clark stimulus package, also known as the newly agreed upon CBA deal. Make no mistake about it, folks. Every time the owners came to the table and said, fine, we'll increase the salary cap to this, you can thank Caitlin Clark. Every time the owner said, fine, we'll pay for your housing again, you can thank Caitlin Clark. Every time the owner said, shoot, we really don't want to come up off this 15% number, but you know what? We'll move a little bit. You can thank CC20.
The WNBA just made history, and the woman at the center of it didn't negotiate a single word of the deal. The league just ratified the largest collective bargaining agreement in the history of professional women's basketball. The salary cap jumped from $1.5 million to $7 million. Average player salaries went from around $120,000 to over $600,000. Minimum pay crossed $300,000 for the first time ever. These are numbers that veterans of this league spent entire careers fighting for and never saw. And buried inside that agreement is a clause with a very careful, very neutral name. A clause that was written for one specific person without ever mentioning her name once. Here's what nobody is saying out loud. This deal didn't happen because the league suddenly developed a conscience. It happened because the math became impossible to ignore, and the math had a name. So before anyone starts handing out credit for the CBA, before anyone starts celebrating like this was inevitable, let's go back to the beginning. Because the real story of how this happened is a lot more complicated, a lot more controversial, and a lot more honest than what you've been hearing. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now. Do you think Caitlin Clark deserves the credit for this entire CBA deal? Or do you think the veterans who spent years fighting for this are being overlooked? I want to see where you stand because this comment section is about to get very interesting.
For example, 2024 Rookie of the Year Caitlin Clark, who made $78,066 in 2025, is poised to see her salary jump to $530,000 in 2026. So this year, she is about to jump to that salary, okay? Now, the other jump, the new provision would also be applicable to younger stars such as Aaliyah Boston, who is max eligible in 2026, and Paige Beckers, who is max eligible in...
To understand why the new deal is as significant as it is, you have to look at what the WNBA actually was before Caitlin Clark walked through the door. Not the version the league liked to present at press conferences. The real version, the one that players quietly lived through every single season. For years, the WNBA operated on a model that made sense for a league struggling to maintain relevance. Modest salaries, modest expectations, modest viewership numbers. Players who were genuinely elite by any basketball standard were earning figures that most people in corporate America would turn down without a second thought. The league wasn't hiding this. It was just never forced to confront it in a way that became impossible to ignore. The television deals were small, not small by women's sports standards, small by any standards. The kind of broadcast rights numbers that get you laughed out of a room if you're trying to compare them to any other professional sports league in the country. Arenas that had been built with the assumption of sold-out crowds were regularly seeing sections of empty seats become a signature feature of game night broadcasts. Sponsors were politely engaged, but nobody was scrambling to get into business with the WNBA, the way brands fight each other to attach themselves to the NFL or the NBA. And the players, they were managing this quietly with a dignity that the situation didn't deserve. Many of the league's biggest names were spending their off-seasons playing overseas. Russia, Turkey, Spain, not because they wanted the international experience, because the WNBA salary wasn't enough to make staying home financially viable. An Olympic gold medalist would spend her summer in the United States, earning what amounts to a modest regional manager's salary, then fly overseas to actually get paid what her talent was worth on an open market. The veterans in this league understood exactly what was happening, and they spent years pushing back against it through collective bargaining negotiations, public advocacy, and every media opportunity they could find. The 2020 CBA brought some improvements: better travel arrangements, improved benefits, a modest salary increase, progress, but the kind of progress that looks meaningful, until you put it next to what the league was actually generating and what the players were actually worth. Nobody was building a viral moment around a Tuesday night regular season WNBA game in 2022. Nobody was refreshing the box score at halftime because they couldn't wait to see what happened next. Ticket prices for WNBA games were an afterthought on the secondary market. Jerseys moved steadily, but not in the kind of numbers that make merchandise executives schedule emergency meetings. The infrastructure was there. The talent had always been there. What was missing was the kind of cultural moment that makes a casual sports fan stop scrolling, click on a game they had no intention of watching, and then stay for the entire fourth quarter. That kind of moment doesn't come from a marketing campaign. It comes from a player. And in 2024, the player arrived. But here's what's critical to understand before we talk about what changed. The veterans who spent years inside that broken system weren't wrong about anything. They were doing the right things in a league that hadn't yet reached the financial tipping point that would force ownership to actually open the wallet. That tipping point wasn't coming from a veteran campaign or a union negotiation alone. It was coming from a rookie out of Iowa with a handle, a release, and a name that was about to appear on more search engines, highlight reels, and sold-out marquees than anyone in the history of this league had ever managed. And the moment she stepped onto a professional court, the entire financial equation of women's basketball started to shift in ways that 17 months of CBA negotiations would eventually try to catch up to. But before we talk about where the money went, let's talk about the number that made everyone stop and stare. Because when the full picture of what Clark was earning versus what she was worth hit the public, it didn't just spark a conversation. It exposed a system that had been quietly exploiting its most valuable asset for an entire season. Let's put the actual figures on the table, because nothing tells this story more honestly than the raw data sitting right in front of everyone's face. In her first professional season, Caitlin Clark earned $78,066 from the WNBA. That is not a typo. $78,000. In the same year, she was responsible for the WNBA surpassing 1 million viewers per game for the first time since 2008. She sold out rival arenas in cities that hadn't had a full house in a decade. She drove merchandise sales, social media impressions, and broadcast ratings to numbers the league hadn't seen in years. She set the single-season assist record in WNBA history as a rookie. She won Rookie of the Year. She was the most talked-about athlete in women's sports and one of the most talked-about athletes in all of professional sports, period. And her paycheck from the league that was benefiting from every single one of those things was $78,066. To put that number in a context that makes the absurdity land properly, that is roughly the annual salary of a mid-level paralegal in a medium-sized law firm. It is comparable to what an entry-level marketing coordinator earns sitting behind a desk at a company where nobody outside the building knows their name. It is less than what a first-year software engineer at a tech startup in Indianapolis would expect to see on their first W-2. It is dramatically, almost insultingly, below what any male rookie in any of the 4 major North American professional sports leagues would earn in their first year under even the most modest rookie-scale contract. Meanwhile, Clark's total earnings in 2025 across all income streams, endorsements, appearance fees, speaking engagements, licensing deals, and WNBA salary combined landed at $16.1 million according to Sportico's year-end report on the highest-paid female athletes in the world. That placed her 6th on that list globally. 6th in the world among female athletes, across every sport on every continent. Her partners included Wilson, Hydro Flask, Gatorade, State Farm, and Nike. Brands don't write those checks because they feel generous. They write them because the return on investment is demonstrably and dramatically positive. So let's do the math that the league was hoping nobody would do publicly. In 2025, the WNBA paid Caitlin Clark $78,066. Her total verified market value that same year was $16.1 million. The WNBA's contribution to her total compensation was less than half of 1%. Less than half of 1% of what she was worth on an open market. The league was receiving franchise-level value, sold-out arenas, record television ratings, national media attention, brand partnerships, casual fan conversion, and paying for it at a rate that no business school professor could explain with a straight face. There is no comparable arrangement in professional sports at this level of asymmetry. Even in leagues with notoriously team-friendly rookie contracts, The gap between what a player earns and what they generate commercially is never this extreme. The NBA's rookie scale, which is itself criticized for underpaying young stars, still produces first-year salaries in the range of $5 to $10 million for top picks. Clark was the first overall pick in the 2024 WNBA draft. She was watched by 2.4 million people on draft night, a number that would have been considered exceptional for a playoff game just a few years earlier. And the league paid her $78,066. Now, to be fair, the structure that produced that number wasn't invented to exploit Caitlin Clark specifically. The rookie scale that existed before the new CBA was built for a league operating at a completely different financial level. It was designed when the WNBA wasn't breaking viewership records, wasn't selling outbuildings, and wasn't attracting the kind of broadcast rights money that fundamentally changes the math. The old structure made a certain kind of sense for the old league. But here's the problem. The league changed faster than the contract did. And for one full season, the player most responsible for that change was being compensated under rules written for a version of the WNBA that no longer existed. That is what made the new CBA's arrival not just financially significant, but symbolically explosive. Because the gap between $78,000 and $530,000 isn't just a raise. It is a public, documented admission that what was happening before was indefensible. And buried inside that new agreement was a clause that tried to make sure it never happened again, without ever once mentioning the name of the person who made the clause necessary. That clause has a very official, very neutral title. But everyone in every WNBA boardroom knew exactly who they were writing it for. When the new CBA was officially introduced in March 2026, after 17 months of negotiations, there was one provision that stood out immediately to anyone paying close attention. Not because of how loud it was, because of how carefully quiet it was designed to be. They called it the EPIC clause, exceptional performance on initial contract. It is a fast-track pay mechanism that allows players on rookie-scale deals to renegotiate their salary and reach maximum or supermax contract levels before their initial 4-year deal expires. The criteria are specific. To qualify for the standard maximum under EPIC, a player must have earned all WNBA first team or second team honors during their rookie contract. To qualify for the Supermax under EPIC, a player must have one MVP. Caitlin Clark's name does not appear anywhere in the official language of the clause. It didn't have to. Every executive, every agent, every front office analyst, and every player representative who sat in those negotiating rooms for the better part of a year and a half understood exactly who this provision was written around. The WNBA and the Players Association found a legally sound, publicly neutral way to acknowledge that their existing contract structure was completely unprepared for what Clark had done to this league's commercial value, without ever putting her name on the paperwork. This is not unusual in professional sports history. The NBA went through something similar decades ago, when a rookie out of Memphis named Derrick Rose created such an immediate commercial and competitive impact that the league quietly restructured elements of its rookie scale to account for players who transcended the normal trajectory. That adjustment became known informally as the Rose Rule. Nobody officially named it that, but everybody in the league knew exactly what it was and who it was for. The EPIC clause is this generation's version of that moment, and the parallel is not lost on anyone who follows this league closely. In several discussions across sports media platforms, commentators have started referring to it simply as the Caitlin Rule. Not because the league endorsed that name, but because the logic is identical. A player arrived who was so far outside the normal parameters of what the existing contract structure was built to handle that the entire framework had to be redesigned around the exception. What makes this provision particularly significant is what it signals about the league's understanding of its own future. The EPIC clause doesn't just solve the Clark problem retroactively. It creates a permanent mechanism for handling the next Clark and the one after that. It is the league officially admitting in collective bargaining language that some players don't just fit into the existing system. Some players require a completely different set of paperwork. The clause is also applicable to other players whose careers are tracking in a similar direction. Aaliyah Boston of the Indiana Fever is max eligible in 2026 under the new structure. Paige Buchers, who enters the league as one of the most anticipated rookies in recent memory, is max eligible shortly after. The provision creates a pipeline for elevated compensation that didn't exist before. And every young star entering this league now has a contractual path to earnings that reflects their actual market value rather than a scale designed for a different era. But here is what the headlines celebrating the epic clause keep glossing over. The clause was only created because one player's situation became so publicly embarrassing that the league had no face-saving alternative. The WNBA didn't look at its financial projections in 2023 and proactively decide to restructure rookie compensation. The WNBA watched Caitlin Clark's $78,066 salary become a national talking point. Watched the comparison to her $16.1 million in total earnings go viral on every sports platform simultaneously, and then sat across a negotiating table for 17 months until both sides agreed on language that would prevent that specific scenario from ever becoming that specific headline again. The epic clause is progress. It is also the league responding to public pressure, commercial reality, and the kind of optics that become impossible to manage when the math is that visible and that damning. Both of those things can be true at the same time. And while the clause was being written, negotiated, and quietly understood by everyone in the room as the Caitlin rule, the Indiana Fever's front office was already doing a completely different kind of math. Because when your franchise player's salary jumps from $78,000 to $530,000, and 3 other key players on your roster need new contracts in the same window, the celebration has a very short shelf life before it turns into a very complicated puzzle. Here is the part of the story that gets significantly less attention than the salary increases, the record-breaking deal, and the celebratory headlines. Here is what happens after the confetti settles and the front office has to actually build a basketball team inside a $7 million salary cap. The Indiana Fever are about to experience one of the most textbook examples of a franchise player cap squeeze in recent professional sports memory. And the numbers, when laid out clearly and without spin, paint a picture that is genuinely concerning for anyone who wants to see the Fever become a championship contender rather than just a compelling story. Start with Clark. Under the new CBA, her salary jumps to $530,000 in 2026. That is just over 7.5% of Indiana's total $7 million cap. On a max deal in 2027, she earns $1.3 million, roughly 18.5% of the cap. On a Supermax extension in 2028, that rises to approximately $1.7 million, which sits around 24% of total available cap space. These numbers are not unfair. They are not even generous by the standard of what Clark is actually worth. They are simply the financial reality of finally compensating a franchise player at something approaching a defensible level. Now add Aaliyah Boston. She is max eligible in 2026 under the Epic Clause. Boston is one of the most versatile and reliable big players in the league, a cornerstone piece around which a legitimate title contender can be built. Her max contract in 2026 represents a significant cap commitment on top of Clark's number. 2 players, 2 significant cap hits, and the roster is still nowhere near complete. Then there is Kelsey Mitchell. This is where the conversation gets genuinely difficult for Fever management, because Mitchell is one of the most dangerous scoring guards in the entire league. She finished in the top 4 of MVP voting in 2025. She is the second best player on this team by a reasonable margin. And she is approaching free agency at a moment when Indiana's cap flexibility is tightening dramatically. Under the new CBA, if Indiana uses the core player designation on Mitchell to retain her rights in 2026, her salary hits $1.4 million. That is a supermax level contract for a player of her caliber, and by every basketball metric, it is money well spent. But $1.4 million on Mitchell, combined with Clark's $530,000 in 2026, climbing toward $1.3 million in 2027, and Boston's max contract, puts 3 players at well over half of Indiana's total cap allocation before a single bench player, backup point guard, or wing rotation piece has been signed. Do the full math on just those 3 players at peak salaries. Clark at $1.3 million, Boston at max, Mitchell at $1.4 million supermax. That combination alone consumes more than half of a $7 million cap. In some projections, depending on the exact structure of Boston's deal, it pushes closer to 60%. That leaves roughly $2.08 to $3 million to fill out the remaining 8 to 9 roster spots needed to field a competitive team across an entire season, including players who can absorb minutes when starters rest, match up with different styles of opponent, and contribute in a meaningful way during a playoff run. This is what every professional sports franchise with a legitimate franchise player eventually confronts. It has happened in the NBA more times than can be counted. A star finally gets paid. The people around the star get paid as a consequence of the star's value. And then the role players, the glue guys, the depth pieces that quietly make 15 wins a season possible, they start to walk out the door one by one because the math simply cannot accommodate everyone simultaneously. There have been specific signals already that this pressure is real and immediate. Reports have surfaced suggesting that Sophie Cunningham, one of the Fever's important role players, would need to accept something close to a league minimum deal, around $300,000 under the new CBA, for the current roster structure to remain intact. There are also indications that Lexi Hull could draw offers in the $600,000 to $700,000 range from other teams, which would be nearly impossible for Indiana to match once the core commitments to Clark, Boston, and potentially Mitchell are factored in. The Fever's front office, Amber Cox, Kelly Crosskopf, and head coach Stephanie White are staring at these numbers right now. Every decision made this offseason will be made with one primary constraint. How do you build a championship-caliber team around the most important player in women's basketball when the salary cap, while historically improved, is still not large enough to retain every meaningful contributor at market rate? The answer to that question will define Indiana's competitive window. And for a fan base that has waited a very long time to see this franchise matter on a national level, the wrong answer would be genuinely painful. Because Caitlin Clark deserves a raise. She earned it in ways that are fully documented and impossible to argue against. And a cap squeeze was always going to follow. Those two facts don't cancel each other out. They are simply two different angles on the same story. And the Fever organization is living inside both of them simultaneously right now. No honest discussion of this CBA deal, this pay increase, or this particular moment in women's basketball is complete without addressing the dynamic that has been sitting just beneath the surface of every press conference, every social media post, and every carefully worded interview response for the past 2 years. A'ja Wilson is one of the greatest players in the history of this league. That is not a compliment designed to soften criticism. It is a factual statement supported by 3 MVP awards, an Olympic gold medal, and a WNBA championship. Her trophy cabinet is extraordinary. Her competitive legacy is secured regardless of what happens from this point forward. She is, by any traditional measure of athletic achievement in women's basketball, the standard against which other players are evaluated. And the new CBA, the historic, record-setting, transformational agreement that Wilson and other veterans spent years fighting to obtain, arrived in the wake of a player with 2 years of professional experience, who is now positioned to earn more on her WNBA contract than most veterans have ever seen in their careers. That reality is genuinely difficult to absorb with grace. And Wilson, to her credit, has never fully pretended otherwise. The frustration has surfaced in ways that are specific enough to be understood without being explicit enough to create a major public incident. Social media commentary that sits right at the edge of what can be read multiple ways. Interview answers that contain just enough edge to communicate everything that wasn't said to every reporter in the room. Public statements about recognition, legacy, and the politics of women's basketball that are clearly not abstract observations. In an interview that circulated widely in 2025, Wilson spoke about feeling that history was being erased, about the sense that achievements built over years of elite competition were being overshadowed by a single cultural moment, about the way the media narrative around Clark had, in Wilson's view, redefined the league's identity in a way that didn't fully account for what came before. These were measured words, but they communicated something very clear to anyone paying attention. It is important to engage with Wilson's perspective honestly, because dismissing it as simple jealousy gets the story wrong. What she was articulating was something that many veterans in this league were feeling simultaneously. The discomfort of watching the financial argument they had been making for years finally gain traction, not because the league evolved philosophically, but because one specific player arrived and made the numbers undeniable in a way that 20 years of outstanding basketball had never quite managed to do. That is a genuinely complicated thing to reckon with. The CBA that Wilson helped fight for exists in its current form because of Caitlin Clark's commercial impact. The salary floor that will benefit journeyman players and rookies who never played a game with Clark is traceable in a direct financial line to what Clark did to the WNBA's broadcast numbers, attendance figures, and sponsorship appeal. Wilson has spent her entire career doing everything right by this league. And the mechanism that finally moved the money was something she didn't create and couldn't have created, regardless of how many MVPs she accumulated. That is not a criticism of Wilson. It is an honest description of how commercial leverage works in professional sports. The league wasn't going to raise the salary cap because players were deserving. It raised the salary cap because it was suddenly generating significantly more money, and the optics of paying its most visible player $78,000 became a national embarrassment that was being discussed on platforms the WNBA had never previously penetrated. Rumors have circulated, and reports have suggested that Wilson's publicly expressed frustrations go deeper than simple professional rivalry, that she felt the broader cultural shift around Clark's arrival came with a dismissiveness toward the players who built the foundation of the league. It's worth noting, as several commentators have pointed out, that issues of recognition and fairness in the WNBA didn't begin with Caitlin Clark's arrival. Players, including Sue Bird, have spoken on record about dynamics within the league that long predated Clark's draft night. What is unquestionable is this: Wilson's decorated career earned her every right to be in the conversation about this league's legacy. And the new CBA, which Wilson helped negotiate, is a genuine victory for players across every tier of this league. Both of those things can coexist with the uncomfortable truth that the financial acceleration that made the new deal possible was driven primarily by one person's impact on the league's bottom line. Wilson has earned her supermax. She deserves every dollar of it, and the structure that finally made that supermax possible was built on numbers that had Caitlin Clark's name written all over them, even when the clause itself did not. There is a version of this story that the WNBA's most loyal, longest-serving fans find very difficult to sit with. It goes something like this: the players who built this league from the ground up, who played through years of inadequate facilities, bargain budget travel arrangements, and salaries that didn't reflect a fraction of their professional value. Those players created the infrastructure that made everything that followed possible. And a player who has been in the league for 2 years is now the primary reason why that infrastructure is finally being compensated properly. That version of the story is uncomfortable. It is also essentially accurate. The women who made the WNBA a viable professional entity before it was culturally fashionable to care about it did something genuinely remarkable. They played through conditions that would have driven most professional athletes to find a different career. They advocated for wage equity in rooms where the people making the decisions were not particularly interested in listening. They built a league that survived financial pressure, public indifference, and an endless supply of commentary about why women's professional basketball would never generate the kind of interest that justified significant investment. They were right that the potential was there. They were right that the league deserved more. They were fighting the right battle for the right reasons in the right arena. What they didn't have, and what couldn't be manufactured by virtue of skill, loyalty, or dedication alone, was the specific kind of commercial catalyst that moves ownership groups from polite acknowledgement to genuine financial action. The new CBA rewards economic impact, not longevity, not loyalty, not legacy, however extraordinary that legacy might be. The Epic Clause exists because some players change the financial profile of the league in ways that advertisers, broadcast networks, and casual viewers can quantify in real time. The clause acknowledges, in collective bargaining language, that a player who drives 1 million viewers to a Tuesday night regular season game represents a different kind of value than one whose excellence is recognized primarily within the sport itself. That distinction is not a moral judgment. It is a market description. And markets in professional sports are notoriously indifferent to moral considerations when the revenue numbers are moving in one direction at a significant pace. This creates a tension that the WNBA is going to be managing for years. Because the old guard of this league, the MVPs, the champions, the veterans who turned down better overseas pay packages to remain committed to building something in the United States, have a legitimate claim on the gratitude and recognition of everyone who benefits from the new financial structure. Their advocacy kept the union strong enough to negotiate the new CBA in the first place. Without decades of collective bargaining history behind the Players Association, the 17-month negotiation that produced this deal would have looked very different. But advocacy, history, and moral legitimacy do not drive broadcast rights negotiations. Ratings do, attendance does, sponsorship revenue does, jersey sales do. And on every single one of those metrics, the WNBA's numbers changed dramatically, and specifically when Caitlin Clark entered the league. Not gradually over a period of years, as might happen with general league growth. Immediately, measurably, and in ways that were directly attributable to one player's presence on the schedule. Rumors have suggested that tensions between the established stars of this league and the new commercial hierarchy are more present in private than they appear in public. Reports claim that conversations about recognition, credit, and the politics of the league's new identity have taken place in ways that don't always make it into the official press coverage. It's been said that some veterans feel the cultural reframing of the WNBA's history undervalues what came before Clark, and those conversations are worth taking seriously, even if the financial outcome of the new CBA benefits everyone across the board. Because there's a version of fairness that the new economy cannot provide. It can raise salaries. It can create pathways to maximum contracts that didn't exist before. It can make sure that the next generation of WNBA players enters the league with a financial floor that the previous generation never had. What it cannot do is retroactively compensate the players who spent years in a broken system doing everything right and receiving far less than they deserved while doing it. The old guard built this leg. The new economy is profiting from it. Both of those claims are fully true, and only one of them is writing the checks. Let's project this forward clearly, because the real significance of what just happened isn't just what Clark earns in 2026. It's what the next 3 years mean for this league's trajectory, for the Indiana Fever's competitive window, and for every player who is going to enter the WNBA over the next decade expecting to be treated as a professional athlete rather than an afterthought on a financial spreadsheet. In 2026, Clark earns $530,000. That is a 578% increase from the $78,066 she received in 2025. It is still, by a considerable margin, the most undervalued contract in professional women's sports. It would be remarkable in any other context. In this one, it is a significant step in the right direction that still doesn't fully reflect what a player generating $16.1 million in total annual market value is actually worth to the entity holding her contract rights. But it is progress. Documented, signed, official progress. In 2027, Clark becomes eligible to sign a 3-year maximum contract worth $1.3 million per year. If everything that has been happening since draft night 2024 continues on its current trajectory, and there is no credible analytical argument for why it wouldn't, that signing will generate news coverage, social media engagement, and public conversation far beyond what its actual dollar figure warrants. Because by that point, every incremental move in Clark's contractual status will be treated as a WNBA-wide event. That is simply the nature of her impact on how this league is perceived and covered nationally. In 2028, if Clark wins MVP, and reports suggest she is eligible for the Supermax as early as the 2025-26 season, if certain conditions are met, she can sign a Supermax extension worth approximately $1.7 million. Some projections put that figure closer to $2 million, depending on cap adjustments between now and then. Either way, that number will receive more media attention than any contract in the history of women's professional basketball. And every time that number appears in a headline, it will bring a fresh wave of attention to the league from audiences who still haven't fully engaged with women's basketball as a regular viewing habit. That is the compounding effect that makes Clark's contract structure different from any other financial story in this league's history. Every raise, every milestone, every contract negotiation becomes a cultural event that drives new viewers to the product. And every new viewer is a data point that the next broadcast rights negotiation will be built around. For the Indiana Fever specifically, these 3 years represent the most important competitive window in the franchise's history. The pieces they retain, release, or lose to cap constraints in the 2026 offseason will determine whether this is a team that competes for championships during Clark's peak years or one that spends those years being interesting to watch without being capable of winning when it matters most. The decisions around Aaliyah Boston's max eligibility, Kelsey Mitchell's contract situation, and the depth pieces that make the difference between a good team and a championship-caliber team will all be made in the shadow of a cap structure that, while dramatically improved, is still not large enough to keep everyone at market rate simultaneously. The Fever's front office is navigating a puzzle that has no easy solution. Every right answer in one area creates a new constraint somewhere else. Beyond Indiana, the ripple effects of the CBA will be felt across every roster in the league. Players who have spent years near the bottom of the salary scale will see their minimum pay more than double. Veterans at the middle tier of the market will find their value recalibrated upward in ways that will affect free agency, trade negotiations, and team-building strategies league-wide. The rising tide of the new salary cap genuinely does lift every boat, even if some boats are rising faster and higher than others. For the next generation of players, the ones who are in college programs right now, watching this league and deciding whether it's worth committing their professional careers to rather than pursuing overseas contracts, the new CBA sends a message that the system is moving towards something that resembles fair compensation. Not perfect, not fully there, but meaningfully closer than it was 12 months ago. And for every rookie who enters this league in the next 5 years and immediately shows the kind of commercial impact that triggers the epic clause, there is now a mechanism in place to address that impact without waiting for public embarrassment to force the league's hand. The WNBA didn't do any of this out of moral evolution. It did it because the numbers made inaction indefensible. That is still progress. In professional sports, progress that comes from financial pressure and market reality is often more durable than progress that comes from goodwill and intention, because markets don't change their minds. They just keep following the money. And right now, in women's basketball, an extraordinary amount of money is following one very specific player whose name isn't written anywhere in the clause that exists entirely because of her. So here is where we actually land when the numbers are fully laid out and the narrative is stripped of everything that isn't supported by evidence. The WNBA did not raise its salary cap because ownership developed a conscience. It did not create the epic clause because the league suddenly recognized what its players deserved. It did not agree to a $7 million cap, $600,000 average salaries, and a $300,000 minimum floor because of goodwill or generosity or moral clarity. It did all of those things because one player made the alternative, maintaining the status quo, publicly, commercially, and financially impossible. The math didn't leave room for a different outcome. And that is simultaneously the most honest thing you can say about this deal and the most uncomfortable. Because the WNBA is finally doing right by its players. And it took a situation that should have been embarrassing years ago to get here. Caitlin Clark's name isn't on the clause that was written for her. It doesn't need to be. Every player cashing a bigger check in 2026 knows exactly why that check is bigger. Whether they'll say it out loud is a completely different conversation. What do you think? Did the WNBA do right by its players? Or is this too little, too late? Let us know below.